Welcome back to Ozarks Tonight. 2020 has been a year like no other. It's been over 9 months since all of our lives changed dramatically as COVID-19 came to the United States.
From social distancing and lockdowns to masking and a new way of life, it's hard to believe that so much has happened in such a short period of time. So tonight, as we wind down 2020, we're going to take you back through the moments that changed life as we know it.
News reports out of China began to surface late in 2019, but the severity of the illness wasn't fully understood at the time.
This outbreak could still go in any direction.
The first case in the U.S. came just 3 weeks into 2020. A man in Washington state tested positive after reporting a fever and cough. The Springfield-Greene County Health Department began to prepare to fight an invisible enemy.
Well, this is an evolving situation, so we know that there are some unknowns. We know there are some things we don't quite know about this virus yet.
Just over 1 month later, on February the 29th, the first confirmed death due to COVID-19 was reported in the U.S. Both of these dates are now in question, as the medical researchers have since determined that the first cases and deaths took place in the country earlier than suspected.
The person who died was a patient at Evergreen Hospital who had underlying health conditions. It was a male in his 50s.
The first case of COVID-19 identified in Missouri was announced by Governor Parson on March 7th.
The Missouri State Public Health Laboratory has reported a presumptive positive result for COVID-19 and has forwarded to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention for confirmation. As governor, I have no greater responsibility than to keep all Missourians healthy and safe.
The positive patient was a woman in her 20s who had just returned from an overseas trip in Italy, an area hard hit by the virus. Just a few days later, on March the 12th, Health Director Clay Goddard announced the first case in Greene County.
We will be making contact with anyone at risk from this patient, and if there is risk to the general public, we will make public announcements as such.
Parson announced the first death from the virus in the state on March 18th, a man in the Columbia, Jefferson City area.
It's unfortunate we're going to be here speaking today. We've had our first death of COVID-19 here in the state of Missouri. It occurred in the Columbia area.
Springfield-Greene County Health Director Clay Goddard held a press briefing to announce the first COVID death in the county on March 23rd.
I take this next announcement very personally. I am heartbroken to report the first death from COVID-19 in our community.
1 day later, Springfield Mayor Ken McClure announced a stay-at-home order which shuttered businesses deemed non-essential and sent many workers home. The order would go into effect on March 26th and was set to last 30 days.
The order requires Springfieldians to stay at home except for essential activities as our community continues to work through to slow the spread of COVID-19.
Parents, teachers, and students were mostly left in limbo during the early days of the pandemic, not knowing when or if they would be able to return to class. Governor Parson ordered schools to remain closed through the end of the academic year on April the 9th.
And for you seniors out there, I understand how disappointing this will be to not be able to have that graduation ceremony. But let me assure you this, we will work with DESE, we will work with the superintendents across the state to make sure you get the opportunity to walk down that aisle and receive that diploma. I know you've worked hard for 12 years, and we want to make sure you have the opportunity to do that.
After a month in lockdown, a glimmer of hope came at the end of April. On the last day of the month, Springfield city leaders announced a phased reopening plan. Some businesses were allowed to reopen, but capacity was limited. Entertainment venues, including bars and nightclubs, would still remain closed.
You know, we do have a goal of walking that tightrope between reopening the community very quickly and safely, but also keeping our eyes on the prize, which is, making sure that we don't let this disease get an upper hand in our community.
An incident in Springfield became an early case study in the effectiveness in masking as May drew to a close. Multiple hairstylists at a Springfield Great Clips location tested positive for the virus, but only after being in close proximity to over 100 clients. One of the customers during that time reflects on receiving the call from the health department about the exposure.
They told me I had come into direct contact with somebody who tested positive for COVID-19. Before I could even think about it, I kind of just shouted, "What?"
Both the stylist and clients were masked, and all of the clients that were tested for COVID-19 tested negative. The Ozarks once again made national news over Memorial Day weekend as residents weary from COVID quarantine traveled to Lake of the Ozarks for the unofficial kickoff of summer.
It's a holiday weekend. We knew that people were going to be out. It's going to be busy. But I want to say again, the majority of the people in the state of Missouri were doing the right thing. We're taking the right action. So I hate, it's unfortunate that was on national news. And
a video of patrons at Backwater Jack's showed little social distancing. The owner of Backwater Jack's would respond to the video, saying that a lack of social distancing isn't a crime and that no laws were broken.
Still to come, masking becomes the topic of conversation as virus cases mount, but not everyone was on board with the idea.
We will continue our COVID-19 year in review after this short break. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our end-of-year COVID-19 special. As the Ozarks continued to reopen,
mandatory masking became a topic of conversation to slow the spread of the virus.
There's no other option to contain the disease once public health is overwhelmed. And once we do that, we lose testing capacity and we have sick healthcare workers and our system will crumble. We're left with human behavior. That's our only option to slow this down.
Despite strong pushback by some in the community.
It is not my duty to protect others. I'm against forcing people to wear masks. By all means, if you feel like you need to wear a mask, I'm all for it.
It's a 99% recovery rate. The 1% is horrific. Of course, we don't want to see anyone die. But let's get our stats correct before we start forcing a mandate on the people of Springfield, Missouri.
Springfield City Council passed a masking ordinance on July 13th. It has since been renewed multiple times.
10 days after the passing of the ordinance, former Springfield City Councilwoman KRISTI filed a lawsuit against the city claiming the ordinance was unconstitutional.
I know we have a big medical community here and they believe in masking, and so that's a debate for the medical community. But for citizens, the big question is, can you constitutionally mandate and make people wear a mask if they don't want to?
That lawsuit was eventually dismissed, but that didn't stop detractors from voicing their opinions on the ordinance. Dozens of people gathered outside the September 8th council meeting to protest masking as a law.
The argument you can never make is he'd have been dead except he had his seatbelt on. You know, you can never make that argument. You don't know.
I could get it tomorrow. I don't know. Any of us could get it. But I don't think the masks are doing a thing.
As summer turned to fall, Missouri Governor Mike Parson, who continued his opposition to a statewide mask ordinance, and his wife, Teresa, both tested positive for COVID-19. Teresa had mild symptoms, but the governor was asymptomatic.
The thing I would ask is for your prayers and for your thoughts for the First Lady, and as we move forward, moving this. And just again, we're both fine. Right now, we just got to take the quarantine procedures in place.
He would return to work after just over a week in isolation. Parson wasn't the only politician that contracted COVID while fighting to be reelected. Just after the first presidential debate, President Donald Trump tested positive on October 2nd.
I want to thank everybody for the tremendous support. I'm going to Walter Reed Hospital. I think I'm doing very well, but we're going to make sure that things work out.
He was admitted to Walter Reed for treatment, but returned to the White House after a few days. First Lady Melania Trump and son Barron would also test positive. Americans would cast their vote for the next president of the country on November 3rd. Voting would look different than in years past due to the pandemic, with many opting to vote by mail, and with extra precautions taking place at polling locations.
When you pull up to your polling location, that line is going to seem longer than it actually is because people are separated by 6 feet, and we don't want people being discouraged and going home because they think it's a longer line than what it actually is.
The volume of mail-in votes caused a delay in results, but former Vice President Joe Biden was eventually named president-elect. As the weather became colder and more Missourians spent more time indoors, the state passed a grim milestone on November 6th. The state hit its 200,000th case of COVID-19.
As cases continue to mount, a ray of hope has come at the end of the year.
3, 2, 1.
The FDA approved emergency use authorization for 2 vaccines, one from Pfizer and one from Moderna. The first person to receive the vaccine in Springfield was a healthcare worker at Mercy Hospital on December 14th.
We're making history. We're part of history now. We're high risk, and so now I can feel like I'm doing even more to protect my family.
Relieved, excited, a little bit more hopeful for the future, maybe.
The COXHEALTH system began receiving doses of the Moderna vaccine on December the 21st.
And it's a hallelujah moment for us. It's one that's deeply emotional for me, knowing that after this hard fight, we're going to protect our employees.
On December 20th, Mitch McConnell announced Congress reached an agreement on another COVID-19 relief bill.
President Trump is pushing to increase the COVID-19 relief checks included in the bill from $600 to $2,000.
Today, Mitch McConnell blocked Democrats' efforts to immediately bring the relief checks up for a vote. He says the chamber will begin a process to address the issue soon.
We'll have more Ozarks Tonight coming up after the break.